So if you look at a standard color-coded political map of Europe, it is honestly, it's essentially lying to you.
Oh, completely. It is a purely administrative fantasy.
Right, because it gives every single square inch of land within those neat little borders the exact same weight. It creates this comforting illusion that a country is just, a uniform block of activity. Like the population and the power are just distributed evenly from edge to edge.
Yeah, but political borders, I mean, they only tell you where the jurisdictions end. They
Yeah.
tell you absolutely nothing about where the actual heartbeat of a nation is located.
Which is why the topographical map we are jumping into for today's deep dive is so jarring.
It really is. It's a total perspective shift.
Exactly, because we are looking at a visualization of Europe from our sources that completely ignores national borders. Instead, we see the physical terrain, so the raw mountains, the valleys, the plains, and overlaid on top of that landscape are these glowing red circular markers.
Right, and they vary wildly in size.
Yeah, varying sizes representing major urban centers. Honestly, it looks less like a map you'd find in a high school classroom and more like a thermal scan measuring the raw gravitational pull of human ambition.
That's a great way to put it, because what you're actually looking at is centuries of trade, conflict, and economic gravity, all condensed into a single visual.
Yeah.
The size and density of those red dots, they just strip away the political narrative. They expose the brutal reality of how human civilization actually organizes itself.
So our mission for this deep dive is to decode what the spatial distribution of these red dots is trying to tell us. We're going to figure out the mechanisms behind these massive clusters and, I think equally importantly, the dark, empty spaces between them.
The gaps are just as important as the dots.
Exactly, because whether you are, navigating international markets, traveling, or you are just trying to understand the geopolitical forces shaping the continent, this map fundamentally alters how you measure the actual power of a region.
Right. It shows you who is hoarding the resources and basically who is being left in the dark.
It really does require a profound shift in perspective. You have to stop viewing nations as static shapes on a page and start treating them like living organisms, like they have central nervous systems, blocked arteries, hungry extremities, the whole works.
I mean, if we're treating it like a living organism, let's start with the most aggressive visual feature on the map.
Oh, the massive red circles on the western side.
Exactly. Looking at the western side, there are these blindingly bright, massive red circles dominating their respective landscapes, specifically London and Paris.
Yeah, when you look at the UK on this map, London is not just a major city, it is a glaring red sun.
It absolutely dwarfs everything else.
It really does. Historically, massive industrial powerhouses like Liverpool or Glasgow or Edinburgh, they look like tiny orbiting specks by comparison.
And, crossing the channel reveals the exact same phenomenon. Paris is a behemoth.
A total black hole.
Right. Regional capitals like Nantes, Bordeaux, and Toulouse, which, they have significant populations and deep histories. They barely register against the sheer concentrated mass of the French capital. Geographers actually refer to this as the megahub effect, or a primate city.
I tend to think of it more like an old oak tree.
Okay, how so?
Well, a giant oak grows this massive sweeping canopy that effectively blocks out all the sun. And because of that structural dominance, no other large trees can survive underneath it.
Right.
They simply cannot access the water or sunlight required to compete. So looking at this map, it seems like London and Paris have essentially engineered their environments to hoard all the demographic and economic resources of their entire countries.
The visual evidence certainly supports that. And, this extreme centralization is not some geographic accident. It is the result of engineered statecraft.
Meaning it was done on purpose.
Oh, absolutely. Over centuries, central governments deliberately designed their national infrastructure so that every road, every rail line, and every line of communication fed directly into the capital.
You see that perfectly in the French railway system.
Yes, the TGV.
Right. Even today, the TGV network operates like a massive spider web with Paris positioned at the absolute center. Like if you are trying to move goods or people from a city in the west of France to a city in the south, you often have to route that journey hundreds of miles north into Paris just to connect to the southern line.
Yeah, the infrastructure forces the centralization.
Yeah.
And that creates this self-sustaining loop. Because Paris and London hold the primary infrastructure, multinational corporations establish their headquarters there.
Which brings in the money.
Exactly. And because the capital flows there, ambitious young talent leaves the provinces to chase those opportunities. Then, the influx of talent demands more infrastructure, which in turn attracts more capital.
It's an economic vacuum. It continuously pulls the brightest minds and the deepest resources away from the periphery.
It really is.
Think about the implications for you as a listener. Like, if you were an entrepreneur trying to build a major tech startup in a secondary city like Nantes, the gravity of Paris is actively working against you.
Right, the investors are in the capital.
The investors, your executive talent pool is drawn to the capital. The political lobbying power is entirely localized there. Surviving in the shade of that oak tree requires fighting a centuries-old structural bias.
Yeah, the national strategy was clearly to concentrate all competitive advantage into a single unassailable node. But if you slide your eyes just slightly east on the map, that entire philosophy of human settlement completely flips.
It is a stark visual transition. We leave the giant black holes of London and Paris, and we enter an area covering the Benelux countries, so Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg.
And that bleeds seamlessly right into the German Ruhr Valley.
Exactly, and then drops straight south into northern Italy. The visual signature here is, well, it's the total antithesis of the megahub.
There is no single red sun here.
Right. Instead, you have this sprawling constellation of medium-sized dots. They are incredibly dense. They're overlapping, highly interconnected.
Yeah, you have Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Brussels, just merging directly across the border into the German Ruhr area. So Düsseldorf, Cologne, Frankfurt, Stuttgart.
And then, passing through the Alps, you hit another dense, glowing web in northern Italy, featuring Milan, Turin, and Genoa.
Exactly. If Western Europe is a story of extreme centralization, this Central European corridor represents the ultimate decentralized network.
It looks less like a single oversized brain and more like a highly distributed nervous system.
Right.
But, looking at this from a purely administrative standpoint, it seems wildly inefficient.
What do you mean?
Well, why spread your economic power across dozens of smaller competing cities like Ghent, Liège, and Stuttgart? Why didn't they just pool their resources and build one massive German-Dutch supercity to go head-to-head with London?
That's a great question. To understand that, you have to look beneath the glowing dots and examine the physical terrain. The answer really lies in the natural infrastructure that connects the Alps to the North Sea.
You're talking about the river systems, specifically the Rhine.
Exactly. The Rhine River acted as a massive natural conveyor belt for early European trade. Historically, you didn't need to engineer a single artificial hub like Paris because the river itself served as the central artery.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. Goods flowed down from the Alps, passed through the industrial centers of the Ruhr, and exited into the global market through the deep-water ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp.
So dozens of highly specialized cities just sprang up along this route to facilitate, tax, and process that continuous flow of trade.
Yep, and the political history of the region locked that decentralization in place.
Yeah, I was actually looking into the timeline here, and neither Germany nor Italy existed as unified nations until the late 19th century.
That's a crucial point.
Right. For hundreds of years, this entire corridor was just a fractured patchwork of independent city-states, duchies, and minor kingdoms. Every single one of them had its own capital, its own banking system, its own university.
And they were locked in fierce, localized competition. There was no single monarch with the military or political leverage to force all the regional wealth to flow into Cologne or Milan the way the French monarchy commanded Paris.
So the political fragmentation of the region actually mandated its economic decentralization.
Precisely.
And, what we questioned the efficiency of this model earlier, this distributed nervous system offers something a megahub lacks, which is massive structural resilience.
Resilience is absolutely the key advantage here. In a centralized system, if a major economic crisis, a natural disaster, or severe civil unrest paralyzes Paris, the entire French economy is paralyzed with it.
Because it's a single point of failure.
Exactly. The nation is deeply vulnerable because its single critical node is compromised. But in a distributed network like the Ruhr or northern Italy, the system simply routes around the damage.
Right. If Stuttgart experiences a severe manufacturing downturn, Frankfurt's financial sector or Düsseldorf's diverse economy absorbs the shock.
Yeah, the broader supply chain survives because it is built on interconnected, fault-tolerant nodes rather than imperial decree.
It's basically the architectural difference between relying on a single, massive mainframe computer versus building a distributed cloud network.
That's a perfect analogy.
So we have cities built by royal decree and cities built by river trade. But as we trace these trade routes further east into Central Europe, the sprawling webs of the Rhineland suddenly stop.
Yeah, the map shifts again.
Right, a third distinct pattern emerges. We move away from the constellations and encounter these heavy anchor points of the continent.
Cities like Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Warsaw, and Poznan.
Yeah, they appear on the map as remarkably large, distinct nodes. They aren't clustered tightly together in a sprawling web like we just saw, but they aren't isolated, solitary black holes like Paris either.
No, there's something else entirely.
They carry massive, unmistakable weight, anchoring their specific regions, but with a huge amount of empty space between them.
What you're visualizing here is the lingering geographic footprint of land-based empires.
Let's break down the mechanics of that. When we talk about the legacy of empires, how does that actually translate into the sheer size of these modern cities?
Well, consider the logistical reality of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. For centuries, cities like Vienna, Prague, and Budapest were not merely population centers.
Right.
They were the command and control nodes for a vast multi-ethnic territory spanning half the continent. Operating an empire of that scale required enormous bureaucratic infrastructure.
Because they had to physically house the imperial militaries, the tax collection agencies, the legal courts.
And all the cultural institutions required to govern tens of millions of people across vastly different geographies. They were engineered for scale from their inception.
Oh, wow.
And because that physical and cultural infrastructure was so deeply entrenched, they survived the eventual collapse of the empires and the redrawing of 20th century borders.
They remained the indisputable focal points of power.
Yeah, because no secondary city could possibly replicate that level of foundational infrastructure.
But there is a really interesting friction point on the map regarding these imperial anchors.
Oh.
If we look closely at Vienna and Budapest, geographically speaking, they are incredibly close to each other, situated right along the Danube River.
They are.
So if they are in such close proximity, how did they both manage to become massive, heavy nodes without cannibalizing each other? Like, why didn't the gravity of Vienna simply absorb the growth of Budapest?
That is a fascinating feature of the map. It shows the result of a very specific and highly unusual political compromise.
Okay.
By 1867, the Austrian Empire was facing severe internal fracturing. So to prevent the empire from collapsing, the ruling class established the Austro-Hungarian Compromise, creating the dual monarchy.
Wait, they literally partitioned the administrative power of the empire just to survive?
Literally. Vienna and Budapest were elevated to co-capitals. They avoided cannibalizing each other because they were explicitly tasked with managing entirely different economies.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, Vienna was responsible for the western, increasingly industrialized half of the empire, while Budapest administered the eastern, heavily agricultural half. The Danube River didn't act as a barrier between competitors. It was the central artery connecting the two specialized engines of the empire.
So political desperation forced them to share the gravity.
So essentially, yeah.
It's wild. But shifting our focus just north of those old imperial borders, there is a very dense secondary cluster of smaller dots in southern Poland, so the Silesia region, encompassing Gliwice, Katowice, Krakow, and Wrocław.
Yeah, and it has the same dense overlapping visual signature as the German Ruhr Valley.
It does. It looks just like it.
And the visual similarity is no accident, because the underlying mechanism is identical. That is the Upper Silesian industrial region. It was not built on imperial bureaucracy. It was built entirely on geology.
Oh, right. The massive, easily accessible coal seams?
Exactly. Where you find dense coal deposits in the 19th and 20th centuries, you inevitably find the heavy industries that rely on them.
So you get the iron smelting, steel production.
Right, and you get a tightly packed cluster of industrial towns growing up side by side to support the mines and the factories. Katowice, Gliwice, and Wrocław form the industrial engine room of that region, which creates a powerful economic counterweight to the political capital of Warsaw.
It is so fascinating to see how the map treats these cities equally. Like, it lays bare the reality that a city built on centuries of delicate political maneuvering, like Vienna, and a city built on raw geological extraction, like Katowice, they glow with the exact same intensity.
Yeah, the map doesn't care about the source of the energy at all. It simply records where the energy has pooled. The data is entirely agnostic.
It measures output, not origin.
Exactly.
Okay, so having explored the immense gravity of the Western megahubs, the decentralized webs of the Rhine, and the heavy imperial anchors at the center, I want us to scan toward the extreme edges of the topographical map.
The thinning peripheries.
Yeah. As we move away from the core, the dense red glow rapidly fades into this dark, empty terrain. The contrast between the center and the edges is severe.
It really is night and day.
On the western edge, Spain is characterized by a few isolated, moderately sized hubs. Madrid sits isolated in the center, Barcelona is pinned to the coast, but the space between them is a vast, dark expanse.
And panning all the way to the far eastern edge, past Poland and Romania, it's a similar story.
Right. Cities like Kiev, Lviv, Odessa, and Venetia appear as these scattered, lonely nodes separated by massive spatial gaps. The visual density just drops off a cliff.
It looks incredibly sparse compared to the blinding light of the Central European corridor.
It looks like the frontier, honestly. But we have to question the immediate assumption here. When a listener sees these massive blank spaces on the map, the instinct is to assume a lack of economic significance.
Right, a wasteland.
Exactly. Are we looking at wastelands, or are we simply encountering the bias of the map itself? Like, are these dark spaces actually where the land is utilized differently? Perhaps serving as the massive agricultural engines required to sustain the dense urban clusters we just analyzed?
Understanding the bias of the data is critical here. This specific map measures urban density and the concentration of human settlement. It does not measure the intrinsic strategic or economic value of the underlying land.
A lack of high-density housing does not equate to a lack of value.
Precisely. Let's examine Spain first, because the emptiness there is dictated by severe topography. Spain is the second most mountainous country in Europe, trailing only Switzerland.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. The massive Pyrenees mountain range creates a brutal physical barrier, cutting it off from the rest of the continent's trade networks. And the interior is dominated by a harsh, arid plateau known as the Meseta Central.
So it is physically prohibitive to build sprawling, interconnected urban webs like the Ruhr Valley across that kind of terrain. The geography actively fights against infrastructure.
Consequently, the population was forced to cluster into a few highly defensible, historically significant areas. Madrid was placed in the center largely by political design to exert control over the peninsula, while the coastal geography naturally supported major trading ports like Barcelona.
So the isolation is a direct product of the landscape.
Exactly. But the emptiness on the eastern edge of the map, in places like Ukraine, is driven by a completely different mechanism.
Because we aren't looking at arid plateaus or impassable mountain ranges there.
No, not at all. We are looking at some of the flattest, most fertile soil on the planet, the famous Black Earth.
Right. And you do not pave over your most valuable asset.
You certainly don't. You do not build massive, dense urban sprawls on top of prime agricultural land. Those widely spaced nodes you mentioned, Kiev, Lviv, Odessa, they function as massive logistical collection points.
They're the funnels.
Exactly. They are the market hubs, where the immense agricultural yield of those vast, dark spaces is harvested, processed, and ultimately shipped out to the global market. Odessa's entire geographic placement is designed to funnel that interior grain out through the Black Sea.
Consider the logistics of that for a moment, as a listener. Those glowing red dots in the center, the massive black hole of Paris, the dense nervous system of the Ruhr Valley, none of them are self-sustaining.
Not even close.
You cannot generate the caloric intake required to feed tens of millions of people from within a concrete jungle. The quiet edges of the map are the foundational layers that make the megahubs possible.
Yeah, the dense centers are perpetually hungry.
The map highlights where the people are consuming resources, but it silently points to the vast, dark spaces required to actually produce them.
And as you noted earlier, maps are not just geographical tools. They are a frozen snapshot of human ambition. You are looking at the remnants of centuries of river trade, the stubborn scars of geography, and the lingering legacy of empires.
Let's quickly synthesize the journey we've taken across this map today. We stripped away the political borders to look at the raw distribution of human settlement.
Right.
We witnessed the intense, engineered gravity of the Paris and London megahubs hoarding their national resources. We examined the resilient, sprawling nervous systems of the Ruhr in northern Italy, built on natural river networks and historical fragmentation.
And the heavy imperial anchors of Central Europe.
Yes, Vienna, Budapest, Prague, designed to administer vast territories alongside the geological anchors built on coal. And finally, we confronted the quiet, vast peripheries, the topographical fortresses and the massive agricultural engines that sustain the entire system.
It just proves that the location of human settlement is never random. It is always a brutal negotiation between what the physical landscape will permit and what the human ego demands.
A negotiation between the landscape and the ego. I love that. And that brings up a crucial final thought for you, the listener, to ponder on your own. we've established that this map is a frozen snapshot of the past.
Right, it's historical.
It is built on the logic of 19th century railway lines, ancient river navigation, and the bureaucratic needs of fallen empires. But the mechanisms driving human settlement are currently undergoing a massive shift.
The underlying variables are being entirely rewritten.
Yeah. Imagine looking at this exact same topographical map projected 50 or 100 years into the future. Factor in the permanent rise of remote work and digital infrastructure, where the necessity of living in the capital to access capital is suddenly broken.
Or factor in a rapidly changing climate.
Exactly. A climate that is altering the viability of ancient agricultural zones and threatening historic coastal ports. If we scan this map in the year 2126, will those massive ancient oak trees over London and Paris finally begin to shrink as their gravity weakens?
It's a fascinating question.
And will new, bright, glowing dots begin to ignite in the quiet, empty spaces at the edges? When the rules of geography change, the map always follows.